This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, please visit LibriVox.blogsome.com. This reading by Gordon Mackenzie. International Episode by Henry James. LibriVox section number 2. The two young Englishmen inaugurated the policy of not resisting Mrs. Westgate by submitting with great docility and thankfulness to her husband. He was evidently a very good fellow, and he made an impression upon his visitors. His hospitality seemed to recommend itself consciously, with a friendly wink, as it were, as if it hinted, judicially, that you could not possibly make a better bargain. Lord Lambeth and his cousin left their entertainer to his labours and returned to their hotel, where they spent 3 or 4 hours in their respective shower baths. Percy Beaumont had suggested that they ought to see something of the town. But, "Oh, damn the town!" his noble kinsman had rejoined. They returned to Mr. Westgate's office in a carriage, with their luggage, very punctually. But it must be reluctantly recorded that this time he kept them waiting so long that they felt themselves missing the steamer, and were deterred only by an amiable modesty from dispensing with his attendance and starting on a hasty scramble to the wharf. But when at last he appeared, and the carriage plunged into the purlieu of Broadway, they jolted and jostled to such good purpose that they reached the huge white vessel while the bell for departure was still ringing and the absorption of passengers still active. It was indeed, as Mr. Westgate had said, a big boat, and his leadership in the innumerable and interminable corridors and cabins, with which he seemed perfectly acquainted, and of which anyone and everyone appeared to have the entree, was very grateful to the slightly bewildered voyagers. He showed them their stateroom, a spacious apartment embellished with gas lamps, mirrors en pied, and sculptured furniture. And then, long after they had been intimately convinced that the steamer was in motion and launched upon the unknown stream that they were about to navigate, he bade them a sociable farewell. "Well, good-bye, Lord Lambeth," he said. "Good-bye, Mr. Percy Beaumont. I hope you'll have a good time. Just let them do what they want with you. I'll come down by and by and look after you." The young Englishmen emerged from their cabin and amused themselves with wandering about the immense labyrinthine steamer, which struck them as an extraordinary mixture of a ship and a hotel. It was densely crowded with passengers, the large number of whom appeared to be ladies and very young children. And in the big saloons, ornamented in white and gold, which followed each other in surprising succession beneath the swinging gaslight, and among the small side passages, where the negro domestics of both sexes assembled with an air of philosophic leisure, everyone was moving to and fro and exchanging loud and familiar observations. Eventually, at the insistence of a discriminating black, our young men went and had some supper in a wonderful place arranged like a theater, where, in a gilded gallery, upon which little boxes appeared to open, a large orchestra was playing operatic selections, and below, people were handing out bills of fare, as if they had been programs. All this was sufficiently curious, but the agreeable thing, later, was to sit out on one of the great white decks of the steamer, in the warm, breezy darkness, and in the vague starlight, to make out the line of low, mysterious coast. The young Englishmen tried American cigars, those of Mr. Westgate, and talked together as they usually talked, with many odd silences, lapses of logic, and incongruities of transition, like people who have grown old together and learned to supply each other's missing phrases, or, more especially, like people thoroughly conscious of a common point of view, so that a style of conversation superficially lacking in finish might suffice for reference to a fund of associations in the light of which everything was all right. "We really seem to be going out to sea," Percy Beaumont observed. "Upon my word, we are going back to England. He has shipped us off again. I call that real mean." "I suppose it's all right," said Lord Lambeth. "I want to see those pretty girls at Newport. You know, he told us that the place was an island, and aren't all islands in the sea? Well, resumed the elder traveler after a while, if his house is as good as his cigars, we shall do very well. He seems a very good fellow, said Lord Lambeth, as if this idea had just occurred to him. I say, we had better remain at the inn, rejoined his companion presently. I don't think I like the way he spoke of his house. I don't like stopping in the house with such a tremendous lot of women. Oh, I don't mind, said Lord Lambeth, and then they smoked a while in silence. Fancy his thinking we do no work in England, the young man resumed. I dare say he didn't really think so, said Percy Beaumont. Well, I guess they don't know much about England over here, declared Lord Lambeth humorously, and then there was another long pause. He was devilishly civil, observed the young nobleman. Nothing, certainly, could have been more civil, rejoined his companion. Littledale said his wife was great fun, said Lord Lambeth. Whose wife? Littledale's? This American's, Mrs. Westgate. What was his name? J.L. Beaumont was silent a moment. What was fun to Littledale, he said at last, rather sententiously, may be death to us. What do you mean by that? Asked his kinsman. I am as good a man as Littledale? My dear boy, I hope you won't begin to flirt, said Percy Beaumont. I don't care. I dare say I shan't begin. With a married woman, if she's bent upon it, it's all very well, Beaumont expounded. But our friend mentioned a young lady, a sister-in-law. For God's sake, don't get entangled with her. How do you mean, entangled? Depend upon it, she will try to hook you. Oh, bother, said Lord Lambeth. American girls are very clever, urged his companion. So much the better, the young man declared. I fancy they are always up to some game of that sort, Beaumont continued. They can't be worse than they are in England, said Lord Lambeth judicially. Ah, but in England, replied Beaumont, you have got your natural protectors. You have got your mothers and sisters. My mothers and sisters, began the young nobleman with a certain energy, but he stopped in time, puffing at his cigar. Your mother spoke to me about it with tears in her eyes, said Percy Beaumont. She said she felt very nervous. I promised to keep you out of mischief. You had better take care of yourself, said the object of maternal and ducal solicitude. Ah, rejoined the young barrister, I haven't the expectation of 100,000 a year, not to mention other attractions. Well, said Lord Lambeth, don't cry out before you're hurt. It was certainly very much cooler at Newport, where our travellers found themselves assigned to a couple of diminutive bedrooms in a faraway angle of an immense hotel. They had gone ashore in the early summer twilight, and had very promptly put themselves to bed, thanks to which circumstance, and to their having, during the previous hours in their commodious cabin, slept the sleep of youth and health, they began to feel, toward 11 o'clock, very alert and inquisitive. They looked out of their windows across a row of small green fields, bordered with low stone walls of rude construction, and saw a deep blue ocean lying beneath a deep blue sky, and flecked now and then with scintillating patches of foam. A strong, fresh breeze came in through the curtainless casements, and prompted our young men to observe, generally, that it didn't seem half a bad climate. They made other observations after they had emerged from their rooms in pursuit of breakfast, a meal of which they partook in a huge bare hall, where 100 negroes in white jackets were shuffling about upon an uncarpeted floor, where the flies were superabundant, and the tables and dishes covered over with a strange, voluminous integument of coarse blue gauze, and where several little boys and girls, who had risen late, were seated in fastidious solitude at the morning repast. These young persons had not the morning paper before them, but they were engaged in